Thanks for tuning into another video from Chef Gone Carnivore. My name is Chef Joe, and I am documenting my journey to lose 200 pounds following a carnivore diet, as well as showing some of the things I'm eating along the way. Now, today's video is by far the easiest way to cook tender, juicy pulled pork in your oven. This pulled pork doesn't require a smoker, and it is done in a fraction of the time. So the first thing you need is a bone-in pork butt or pork shoulder. You don't want to sub in any other cut of pork. The pork butt is the best for pulled pork, and it's super budget friendly. You can usually find it anywhere from $1.50 a pound on sale to maybe $2.50 a pound. If you can only find boneless, go ahead and use that instead, but I do recommend bone-in if it is available. Now, you will want to pat the pork butt dry with a paper towel. You want to get rid of all that residue and juices that it was packed in, and so dry it on all sides, and then you are ready to go ahead and season it. Now, you can rub your pork with anything you like, but since I am doing strict carnivore right now, I will just be using salt. One great thing about doing pulled pork like this is that it is extremely versatile. Now, you could use a southwestern rub, and the pulled pork would be perfect for Mexican food like shredded pork tacos or enchiladas. Or you could throw a barbecue rub on it, and then you'd have pulled pork that you could put barbecue sauce on and use for barbecue pulled pork. You could also do like some citrus garlic and oregano and do more of like a mojo, like a Cuban mojo style pork. But basically, you can flavor it lots of different ways, but the cooking method will stay the same. So you want to transfer the pork butt to a container that is large enough to fit it and still have a lid or foil on top. Now you'll notice that my container is much larger than my meat. That's okay. You can certainly do like I'm doing, but if you have one that's a little closer to the size of the roast, use that. That's fine. The main thing is it just needs to be big enough to hold the entire roast and still be able to put a lid or cover it in foil. That's really all you necessarily need. Now, if you want to add a flavored liquid like chicken stock or citrus garlic juice or something like that, you could do that now before you put on the foil to add some flavor. However, do not add water. It's not necessary. The pork will actually produce enough juices that it will braise in its own juices. So go ahead and cover it in foil. We'll pop it in the oven. It will cook at 325 degrees for 6 hours. Now, after 6 hours, we're going to go ahead and remove the lid or the foil, but just be careful not to burn yourself on the steam that will come out. Now, you know that the pork butt is done when it is tender, and a good way to check tenderness if you went with the bone-in pork butt is to actually pull the bone out with a pair of tongs, and you may need to twist it and pull on it a little bit, but if it comes away clean, where there's no meat left on it, then that's a really good sign that the meat is tender all the way around. Now, the tender meat you should be able to break apart pretty easily with a pair of tongs. It shouldn't take a ton of pressure. You shouldn't really have to yank at it. It should give way to fairly light pressure. That is where you should be after 6 hours. If for whatever reason, like you had a huge pork butt or whatever, or your oven doesn't quite cook as hot, if you go to do this and it just doesn't feel like it's wanting to pull apart, it's still a little bit rubbery, go ahead and put the lid back on and put it in the oven for another half an hour to another hour until you can actually pull it apart easily with a pair of tongs. You'll also notice in this pan, look how much juice is in there. I did not add any water or any juices to this pan before I cooked it. This all came from the pork itself. Quite a bit of this is fat, but there's still quite a bit of juices. Now, I usually like to break it apart into fairly big pieces and let it cool for a half hour or so, just until it's cool enough that I can handle it with my hands. I usually wear a fairly thick pair of gloves, just so I don't get the pork juices all over my fingers. And it is a little easier to handle the heat with gloves on. But once it is cool enough to be able to handle with your hands, you're going to want to go ahead and start breaking it apart. I like to do that in a separate container like this large bowl. It's just a little easier that way. Now, as I am breaking it up with my hands, I'm just paying attention to whether or not what I'm breaking apart is meat or not. Because sometimes as you're breaking things up, you'll find a piece like this that's just rubbery and wouldn't be pleasant to eat. That's just a piece of connective tissue that didn't break all the way down in this process. And so by using my hands, I'm able to find that and discard it. They do make tools like bear claws that you can use to shred pork, and these are great, especially if the pork is still very hot and you're not able to handle it with your hands yet. But if you're not in a huge hurry to serve the pork and you have a little bit of time, I highly recommend letting it cool a little bit first and then doing it with gloved hands. It's easy to do, and you're able to discard anything that you wouldn't want to eat that is in that pork shoulder. After you are done shredding it all up, I usually give it a little bit of a toss. The pork is all pulled apart. You'll want to go ahead and add in enough cooking liquid back to the pulled pork to moisten it. I usually add a couple of ladlefuls, but you can add however much you'd like. This liquid will add moisture, it'll add flavor, and it will add salt back to the pork. It'll season it because this liquid will be a little bit salty. So I just kind of toss it around, and then once it's about how moist I just kind of like to have it glisten a little bit. You can kind of tell when the pork looks more moist than it had before. And once I'm there, I'll just try a piece, toss it in my mouth, and just check both moisture level and salt level. If it still tastes a bit dry, I can add a little bit more of the juices. But if all I'm missing is a little bit of salt, then I can always come in and grab some kosher salt or whatever salt it is you're using and just add a little bit, toss it back again to distribute it and let that salt kind of dissolve into the pork. And then try it again. So you're just going to salt to taste at this point. Depending on how much salt you used at the beginning will determine about how much salt you'll need to add here at the end. If you're tasting the pork and it just tastes kind of flat or bland, that just means that it needs a little bit of salt. So you just want to add a little bit, toss it around, taste it. Once you get to the level of salt that you like, then you are done, and it's time to go ahead and bag it up or put it in the fridge for future meals. Now, one pork butt will serve a lot of people. That's one great thing about doing pulled pork. And if it's just a couple of you like it is with Joy and I, one pork butt's way more than what we can eat. So I usually just pop a couple of containers of it in the fridge, and then I bag up the rest. One of the beauties of doing braised pork like this is that it freezes really well and then it reheats really well. You lose very little quality during the freezing, thawing, and reheating process. A lot of foods are much better eaten the very first day they're done. The pulled pork is nice because it really holds up well during the freezing and thawing process, and you actually don't notice that big of a difference between the first day you've eaten it and then if it's 6 months later from your freezer. So fill up as many bags as you can't eat and freeze them, and then you'll have food later on in the month or later on in the year when you just don't have time to cook and you remember, oh yeah, I've got that pulled pork in the freezer. I'll thaw a bag out, and then we'll have a couple of meals this week without having to do any work. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you. Hopefully you feel more confident about being able to cook a pork shoulder in your house, in your oven, and be able to make some pulled pork to help you have delicious food on this carnivore diet. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and you'll know when I upload videos like this in the future. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.